All right, in our class working with the Raspberry Pi, a lot of, we just saw how you could have like a while loop that runs until it gets a certain input. What we're also going to see is actually, with the Raspberry Pi, a lot of the time we end up doing something like a while true loop, all right, which is basically a loop that runs forever and ever and ever until we actually force the entire Python program to die, to be shut down. So let's just think about what that means for a second. So let's set up a while true loop. Now, what does this mean, actually? Just in the context of Python, while true. Now, if you remember from before, a while loop will run, let's say, I don't know, print hi. So a while loop will print, or will do whatever's inside of it, so long as the evaluation condition it has is true. Okay? Now, in our previous code, let's do, what was it called? Oh, file 4, whatever. So in our previous code, the evaluation condition was actually something which could potentially sometimes be false, right? Like if name eventually was actually equal to exit in this case, we would, disappear, right? We would fall out of the loop. Now in this situation, we're saying while true. True can never not be, true always is true, right? True can never be false, all right? So this is weird. We're actually saying, okay, while forever, run, all right? This loop will, if Python is left and allowed to run forever and ever and ever, this will always run. Okay, what would happen if we were to actually run this? Okay, holy crap, look at this. Running and running and running. Now, if we wanted to kill this, and this is a good thing to learn as as we're doing programming in Python, is a lot of times you're going to do stuff and maybe it hits this is known as an infinite loop, okay? And sometimes we want this to happen, a lot of times we don't. If you wanted to stop this from happening, you go in and you press Control-C, okay? Do you see how it just did? This had killed it for us. If we were to accidentally have it run again, you go and you do Control-C while clicked on the terminal, and that does it. And what that implements is something known as a keyboard interrupt. Okay, and that's a great way to just end a program if you don't like what it's doing. Now, we're going to, in class, be doing a lot of while true loops, but we don't want to always, this is actually a sad way to break code. What we actually want to do is have it accept that Control-C, that code ending key combination, in a good way. And what we're going to do is put it in something known as a try except. So try, and we'll go over these in 1 second. So what does this do? So this is a weird thing in Python, but it's a way to make your code a little bit more, especially in the way we use it with the Raspberry Pi, a little bit more workable, I guess. Maybe that's a good word to use. So what it does is this code tries something, and then it keeps trying that, or it'll basically try that until a keyboard interrupt is found, and then it does this and leaves, okay? And the thing it's trying is actually an infinite loop. So it's going to try an infinite loop and just keep printing hi forever and ever and ever, until, though, we press Control-C, at which point it says finishing, and then it's good. So if we were to run this, so hi. Okay, now do you see how whenever we press Control-C, which is what I did there, it just said finishing and finished really nicely? Where before it had this red text which pops up. Generally, in Python, we want to avoid the red text. That usually means something didn't work as well as it should have, or something. It failed in one way or another. And sometimes we want things to fail, and there may be times when we're debugging, I guarantee you there will be, where you're just going to want to kill the program. So this isn't inherently a bad thing in itself, but to have a system which is by design, some piece of code by design, you need it to kill, to have it end this way, this isn't good. So what we did right here was just, trial, while true, except that's it. Okay, now building on this too, what we're going to add in is something known as it's printing hi too often. So what I'd like to do is actually have it delay a little bit. And in Python, we can do that by putting a time.sleep call in. And so this is our first Python library that we're interacting with. It's going to be the time library. So we can bring in a library which is an extra set of code for Python to use by an import statement. So we do import time up at the top. Okay, and then what you can do down here is you can do time.sleep, and then it'll actually tell you, the newer version of idle, it actually is really nice because it'll say, okay, you want to put in a value here which is seconds. Okay, so let's put in 0.5. So what this is going to do, actually let's put 1 because it'll be a little bit more noticeable. And what this will do now is it's going to try the following piece of code. It's going to run forever, print hi hi, but then in between printings of hi hi, it's going to sleep for 1 second. And it'll do that forever, or until we press Control C, which is the keyboard interrupt. I'll just make a note here. And then just print finishing. Actually, let's have it say bye, because that'll be nicer. Alright, so if we were to run this, now what's it going to do? Hi, 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 hi. Now do you see how it's much slower in its printing than before? That's because of this little pause right here. We're pausing by 1 second. And then if we go in and we say, okay, Control C, whoops, there we go. Whoops, press too many keyboard interrupts. Now the interesting thing you might have noticed when this was running, well, you probably wouldn't because you can't see me pressing the keys, but when I first pressed it, it actually didn't, when I did the Control C, it actually didn't disappear right away, and that's because during a time dot, it was actually in the middle of a sleep cycle, okay? And when you're sleeping in Python, you're actually not responding to anything else, okay? So if we were to actually put in a bigger sleep time period, so maybe 5 seconds, what would this look like? Okay, you can see it's much slower, right? Now if I were to just press Control C here, I'm pressing it, it didn't do anything. Now it actually exited. So during that time dot sleep, the system was completely unresponsive. And this is a good thing to remember. But once it came back from sleep, it figures out that during the time it was sleeping, it actually had received a keyboard interrupt, a Control C, and then it was able to exit, okay? But this is just a good thing to keep in mind. And we will be using this structure a ton, because really what you're going to be doing is your Raspberry Pi code, code here. Alright, this is going to be very, very common. This sort of structure where you're going to have a try, while true, except with the Pi. Also, with the Pi, you're going to have a lot of times like just while some condition is met, you're going to do a thing on effectively an infinite loop until you don't want to.